you may be seated.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, with the consent of all parties and Elder Goodchild, or Elder Donio rather, I'm in a position to answer your question about Elder Donio's age. Elder Donio is 72 years of age and was born on April 14, 1950. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Chief Machano. Chief Machano, focusing on what you've been able to witness during your own lifetime, I'd like to discuss a little bit more resource extraction occurring on Bigdigong Nishnabeg's traditional territory, and in particular, forestry. And what I'd like you to explain is the impact on the Pick River.
Yep. Marathon Paper started driving wood down the Pick River probably in the early 40s. And
Sorry, it
that's
was
when
called Marathon Paper?
Marathon Paper, it was known as then. Changed names several times as well, but originally was known as Marathon Paper.
Thank you.
When they started driving wood down the river in the early 40s, when I grew up, that river, the Big Tigzibi, the Pick River, was always full of wood, constantly full of wood all summer long, until late fall, just before freeze up, because the lake would get rough, and they'd have to take that wood around the corners to Marathon, to the mill by boom. So growing up, that river was always full of pulpwood. We used to swim in there. I remember elders trying to paddle their canoes through that wood and having to, with their paddles, separate the wood so they can get through with their canoes. Well, so things were difficult in trying to navigate that river most of my lifetime. Probably just before they stopped driving wood down the river, which I believe was sometimes in the early 80s, they finally left a little channel with the boom so that the small boats and the canoes could get by. And they only did that because our people complained, and some of the younger guys who were in their late teens and early 20s were talking about blocking the road and not letting anybody down to the mouth at all. So finally, Marathon Paper acted and left a little channel for the boats to go by. So all my life was like that.
Do you have any memories as a boy of swimming in the Pick River?
Yep, we used to swim in the Pick River, mud and all, and we'd have to swim in between the logs. You know, you'd dive under and then you'd come up for the spaces on the logs, things like that. We would go and swim in Lake Superior as well, but Lake Superior is cold, icy cold. So we used to have to make fire and then go for our swim and come and warm up by the fire. But it was again about a half hour, 45-minute walk for us as kids to go down there. So we used to just swim in the river, which was just down the hill.
Now, already in your testimony, Chief Machano, you've talked about mining and commercial fishing in the territory. Let's turn to hydroelectricity. Are you aware of hydroelectricity being generated in the traditional territory of Bigdigong Nishnabeg?
Yep. On the Black River initially, there was a hydroelectric plant that generated power for the old Ontario paper town site, and they would run a line to Hernberry North as well, so that the Hernberry North had power from that station as well. They didn't run a line down to our community, that's for sure. But so they had power in those two communities and we didn't. Ontario Hydro put a line in there, I believe sometimes the late fifties, early sixties, just about the same time the highway went through. There's the three other plants, one on the Caggiano River. We own that now 100%. It was built by a group of people in Southern Ontario. They went bankrupt with it and sold it to us. So we took it over and we're running that. And the very first one that we built was in conjunction with a company, again, I forget their name now, but that's the Wayway Power Station on the Black River. We have a 10% net interest in that. But they didn't have to build additional dams. They used the existing dam that was there from the Ontario Paper pulp operations. So they would just use that dam and then divert the water into the penstock. And that's run of the river project. You don't flood the river in order to gain power. You just divert most of the water. They're required to let, I forget how many percent, I believe it's 10 or 15% of the water to go over the falls. Ambata Falls on the White River is the same thing. A company approached us and talked to us about building a power station on the White River at Ambata Falls, and we partnered with them. We're 50%, 51% owners, they're 49% owners. And again, that's a run of the river project, creates about 20 megs and gives us quite a good income really, but still not enough. But again, run of the river, so it just diverts the river, let some come over the falls. Even in winter, that water has to go over the falls. And the reasoning that the province gives us is that it's for tourism purposes, but there's no tourists there in the winter. So we could probably use that that water to generate power during the winter. But those are the three that are on our traditional territory. The old Ontario Paper site has been decommissioned long ago. There's nothing there anymore except the dams. And Wayway Power is using that.
You've touched on this already, but is there any connection between the logging industry or the pulp and paper industry and hydroelectricity?
Just the Ontario Paper site. Just the Ontario Paper site, but in regards to the hydro, when hydro first came to our community, sometimes in the late 50s and early 60s, and I can remember when they were putting that hydro line up. They put that up without permits either. They still haven't got permits. When they put that line up, it's my firm belief they put that line there to supply the logging operation that was at the mouth of the Pick, because that logging operation used to use diesel generators to create power. And I can remember as a kid that those diesel generators, they're running day and night all summer long because the operation closed down in the winter. So it's my belief, again, being cynical, that and always cynical of both the province and Canada, that they put power in took power through our community to supply that logging operation. We were a byproduct really. If it wasn't for that logging operation at the mouth of the Pick, we probably wouldn't have gotten electricity until much later.
Chief Marchano, when we talk about resource extraction in the territory, and we talk about forestry and mining in particular, who was undertaking that extraction?
Private corporations owned by non-indigenous people. In regard to the mining companies nowadays, in the old days, mining companies were Canadian owned, but more and more they're internationally owned. For instance, the mine at the Barrick mine at Hemlo has changed hands several times, and at one time owned by a Canadian company, then a company from South Africa, now Australians own it. So it's still named Barrick, but the ownership changes.
What have the impacts been of this resource extraction on your traditional territory?
The logging operations, in my opinion, have the greatest impact
Why is
because
that?
they move whole forests. They take whole forests down. And you only have to look at a satellite map, satellite photo to see that. They remove whole forests and they disrupt the wildlife that are in those forests.
This morning, when you discussed the responsibility that Anishinaabe people feel toward the land, you referred to the problem of pollution in particular.
Yep, and pollution caused both by the forest companies and sometimes by the mining companies.
Can we deal with the forestry?
Yep,
companies
related to runoff into the creeks and the rivers, with the Marathon paper operations up the Pick River. You see pictures, they would pile that wood during the winter right along the banks of the river. They had a dam at the south end of Wabuscun Lake, and they'd flood that lake. They'd flood that whole lake, and they'd pile wood alongside it. And the same on as the White Otter, which is a branch of the Pick River, which moves off to the east towards Hillsport. But they'd pile all that wood along the banks, and you see pictures of them in the spring bulldozing that wood into the water. And typically the shorelines of Biktigzibi and the White Otter are all mud and sand, and clay and sand. So they'd be bulldozing all that sediment into the water. You see pictures of bulldozers right in the water with another bulldozer pulling them out backwards. That kind of things that happened in the past. In regards to sluicing wood, they had dams all over the place. I'm a prospector, and I've been all over our territory, and there's old dams everywhere. Because what they would do is they dam all those small lakes and sometimes big lakes and build the water up. And then when they wanted to sluice their wood down those small creeks, sometimes, half the size of this room, they'd let that water go. And it would flush all that wood down those creeks along with almost everything else that was there in the creek. So flushing all that sediment and soil down the river as well. That's what was happening in the past. One of the things that we're looking at today is trying to create 1 kilometer buffers on each side of all our major rivers, and we're getting resistance from all the forest companies and the NFMC, which operates the forests in our territory. So in the past, there's been a lot of pollution from the forest companies. There still is, because when you're bulldozing the soil and you're tearing up the soil with skidders and mechanical harvesting, every time it rains, that's gonna get run off and it's gonna go into a creek somewhere. So that whole issue in regards to pollution of our creeks and our rivers from the forest industry. Also, I was in that business for a while. And I know that those forest companies are not very diligent about where they spill their hydraulic oil and their engine oil when they're out in the bush. If the MNR is not around watching, it's gonna go in the ground. That's where it's gonna go. There was an operator up on the Dead Horse Road. I'm not gonna name him because he's passed away right now. And he left an awful mess halfway up the Dead Horse Road. And our lands and forest, our lands and resources people, Brittany and Juanita, had a heck of a time pushing MNR to get that cleaned up, but they finally did. Old tires, oil, bits and pieces of machinery laying all over the place in that old camp. The old camps themselves just sitting there, just abandoned. And us having a heck of a time, a heck of a fight to get MNR to clean that up.
Returning to the Pick River in particular, what has been the impact then of logging on the Pick River, the river you've told us about swimming in?
Well, there's spawning beds. There's spawning beds for sturgeon in the Pick River. We have a good population of sturgeon now, but at one time they were on the decline, and they were almost, I guess, treated as endangered. They weren't a species at risk, but as endangered, and that was because their spawning beds were covered with bark from those logs, and particularly the spawning beds below what's now called Manitou Falls. Historically, they called it Lake Superior Falls because it was first falls when you're going up the river. But that's where the spawning beds for the sturgeon were. I remember my dad's cousin, Gilbert Machano, who basically, just as a matter of fact, he was a paratrooper in the Second World War. He was in the first parachute battalion. But anyways, he told me that he remembers working up there again for someone. I don't know who the heck he was working for, but telling me that he saw sturgeon spawning on the spawning beds below Manitou Falls. It looked just like a bed of logs, and there were so many of them, and they were so big. And eventually they started to die off because of all the bark that were on the spawning beds. Once Marathon Paper, probably American Can by then, stopped driving wood down the river started to clean itself up a bit, and those sturgeon are starting to come back now because they've got clean spawning beds.
Were there any other forms of pollution caused by Marathon Paper?
In Marathon Harbor, the mill in the past didn't have a clarifier, and they would put a lot of their effluent right out into Lake Superior, and as a result, there's a lot of mercury out in the center of Peninsula Harbor. That has been capped, but the pollution seems to have spread a bit. According to some studies done by Fisheries and Oceans, that cap doesn't seem to be doing much of a job. They debated whether they wanted to remove all that all that mercury and the sediment at that time and take it somewhere else, but where are you gonna take it? So the decision back then was made to cap it off. So there's an area of concern, the AOC in Peninsula Harbor, and that's a direct result of that mill being there.
Were any particular species put at risk by forestry operations?
Probably caribou. Because caribou need mature forests.
And in relation to the mining industry, you'd already said that forestry and mining had impacts.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate for us on the impacts of the mining industry on the territory?
Yep, at one point, after the mines in Hemlo went in, there was a cyanide spill. And that cyanide spill was a result of a broken effluent line going out to one of the tailings ponds, I guess. But that effluent line was owned by Newmont. And as a result, a lot of cyanide went into the Cedar Creek. We didn't pick up any cyanide at the Black River. The Cedar Creek goes in the Black goes in the Pick right past it. At that time, we were taking water out of the Black River. We had a treatment plant by then, and we're taking water out of the Black River because the Pick River we found had too much aluminum in it, and as part of the whole treatment process, you add alum to set into your water to settle down all the particles. The alum helps. So basically, alum is aluminum, really. But because of the high levels of aluminum in the Pick River, we didn't want to take water out of the Pick, so we took it out of the Black. And the Pick, basically, because of all the mud is wide, all the clay is wide, aluminum levels were so high.
I'm going to ask that a map that's being placed in front of you be projected on the screen now, please. And this is the same area as what we have depicted in Exhibit 23, but it contains different features. Are you familiar with this map, Chief Machano?
Very familiar.
Can you tell us what it depicts generally?
What it depicts is the accumulated impacts on Beeg-Degong's traditional territory. But when you look at these impacts, you could extrapolate those impacts over almost every community's traditional territory along the North Shore and elsewhere as well, because the same thing is happening.
Along the North Shore of Lake Superior.
Along the North Shore of Lake Superior.
Now, the area outlined with the red border is what, sir?
Again, that's what we asserted in the land claim as our exclusive traditional territory. Like I said, we made an agreement with Netmizzagming on where that eastern boundary is going. We're talking to along Lake 58 about where the boundary will go and where the overlaps are to the north, and we're talking with Pace Plat First Nation as to where things should go on the western side as well.
And we can see here where Beeg-Degong Nishnabeg is, and it's, perhaps I'll ask Mr. Bass to help us with this on the screen. But it's the same location, unsurprisingly, as the area that you identified as the Ojibways of the Pick River on Exhibit 23, the other map.
Yep, that's right.
I want to focus on a couple of parts of the map as described in the legend, what is the light purple area described as municipal boundaries?
Those are the municipal boundaries of Terrace Bay on the west. The township of Marathon, just north of us. And then up on the northeast side, the township of Manitowocz. And I'm looking at this and it looks like they even have the township of White River off to the east as well.
Now, by the way, do you know who prepared this map?
Our GIS guy,
And what is GIS?
Geographic Information System,
And who is your GIS guy?
David Crothers.
Now, can you tell us about the orange shading labeled as mining leases? What are they?
Those are leases from mining companies. You see them at up at Manitowocz where the Gico and Wilroy mine is. You see them at Hemlo where the Barrick, the Teck, and the Barrick mine is, and where the Teck and Newmont mines used to be. You see them north of Marathon where the Gen mine, the proposed Gen mine is going to go. You see them up in the northwest of that Gen mine again. But those are historical mining leases as well. And then you see them again, looks like around Terrace Bay a bit.
And when we speak of these areas, are we speaking of mines to be developed or mines that have been developed?
Both.
For those areas, are members of Big Dagong permitted access?
To certain areas, but the core area, no. Because you can't be wandering about in there. It's an industrial location.
And we see the area you've described as the Hemlo mine, and it's roughly halfway between Big Dagong and Pic-Mobert or
That's correct. Yep.
Netpizokabig,
Yep.
Anishinaabe.
Yep.
And what is the light bluish gray color for past mining claims? Can you tell us about those?
Oh, I think we put those on there just to show the level of activity that there was in our community. So we want to show where there was past mining claims as well, just to show that level of activity. So we've included the present mining claims, but we want to make sure that we focused on past mining activity as well.
When we think about mining exploration work, you've told us you're a prospector. What does that work entail? What's involved in all of that mining exploration work?
It varies from simple things like walking your claims, looking at rocks, breaking rocks, and looking at rocks and looking for mineralization, to actually stripping and blasting and trenching and taking bulk samples. So there's a whole varying scope of what you do in regards to what's considered exploration.
Finally, in terms of mining, we have the gray area for active mining claims. What does that represent?
Those represent the mining claims that are in good standing right now.
How
Right.
many of those active mining claims in good standing are there right now in Big Dagong Anishinaabeg's title area?
I got no idea, but lots.
And
I couldn't tell you offhand.
do you know how many individuals or companies hold those claims?
I think we've estimated somewhere in the order of around 90. I'm not, again, 100% sure how many.
And do you know what area of, what percentage of your title area, I should say, is represented by those title claims?
I think 10-15%.
Now, moving on to logging, can you explain the two types of red shading on the map?
The two types of red shading basically are past harvesting activities and planned harvesting activities.
And past, for this purpose, is up to 2020, is that correct?
Up to 2020, that's correct. And the plan is for the next 10 years.
And do you know the percentages of the title area that they cover?
No, I wouldn't be able to offhand.
Fair enough. Now, the black lines we see are forest access roads, is that correct?
That's forest access roads, yep.
And what's the purpose of the forest access roads?
To access the territory to remove timber.
Are you aware of the total length, if we add them all up, of those forest access roads?
I think we estimated somewhere in the order of 3,000 kilometers.
And then we have the yellow stars labeled aggregate pits.
Yep.
And what are those, sir?
Those are aggregate pits where they've taken gravel out for different reasons, mostly for the forest industry, but also for mining industry and also for municipalities as well. They're all over the place. Really, you can see them here.
Do you know how many active and inactive aggregate gravel or aggregate pits there are in the title area?
No, but I can't say that offhand, but lots. One thing I want to note about aggregate pits as well, that burns my whatchamacall. Is that with those aggregate pits, if they're within a municipality, the municipality gets a cut and per ton, and we don't get a cent from any of those aggregate pits within our territory.
Chief Machano, stepping back and excluding everything we've talked about, we're left with the white areas on the map. Is that correct?
Yep.
What do they represent?
Well, the white areas within our traditional territory, I can tell you, are white basically because we don't have information on it. But some of those areas I know for a fact have been forested and have been forested in the past, because you look at that white section in the middle, and the reason they haven't got anything on there is probably because there's no records. The records are too old because logging started somewhere in the late 20s, early 30s. You look at that whole area in right in the center where Kalala Lake is, that's been logged. That's been logged by Pigeon Timber Company and Ontario Paper Company. They had, but they're not marked on the map because there's no records anywhere. But I know from historical stuff that they've been logged and talking to some of the elders as well. But you look at that provincial park area of Naze, there was a prisoner of war camp there at one time. And those German prisoners that were there used to work in the bush camps that were up along that whole little Pick River all the way up to Kalala Lake. And just east of Kalala Lake, west of Kalala Lake, there was a Japanese internees camp. And they were logging up there as well. And none of that stuff is on this map because that's not readily available information.
Can you just help us identify Kalau Lake on the map?
Kalau Lake is, you have to go dead center of that traditional area and move a little bit west or left when you're looking at the map. And you'll see a big lake in there with a kind of a jog on it. And that's Kalau Lake. Right within that open area, open white area.
I see.
Just above the printing for the Little Pick River? Or the something? Oh, it's not the little, it's the,
Just below where you see the printing is ineligible really because it's too small.
right,
But it'll say Kalau Lake Conservation Area. Just below that is Kalau Lake.
okay. I think I've
Okay.
got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I've got it too. Thank
Yeah.
you. And by the way, Your Honor, while we have it in our hands, I'd ask that this be marked as Exhibit 25, please.
Thank you. We all right with that? No objection. Thank you very much. And this shall be called the, this map has been titled the Big Tigong Nishnabeg First Nation Alienations.
Yes, please.
So map called that. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Mashano, I'm coming toward the end. This is my second last area to address with you in my questions. And it has to do with disruptions to family structures. And no discussion on that topic is complete without a discussion about the impact of Indian residential schools. Has the Indian residential school policy of the Government of Canada impacted on Big Tigong Nishnabeg?
Yep, and the whole residential school problem really an issue impacted all our First Nations right across Canada, including Big Tigong Nishnabeg. And there was not only the whole issue in regards to the abuse, both physically and sexually and mentally, that was put on those kids when they were in those schools, not to mention not being taught properly. They weren't schools, they weren't really schools. They were places of incarceration, that's what they were. To try to break up the whole Nishnabeg and First Nation culture. Really, that's what they were there for. That was their purpose, to take little brown kids and make white kids out of them. That was their purpose. And there was a lot of violence. And I know because my wife was a product at a residential school and she shared with me a lot of the stuff that went on in there. And when she got together with her chums, she had a little group of chums, there was 5 of them. They used to get together once in a while and they'd sit around my kitchen table having tea and bannock and whatever. And I would be sitting on the couch watching TV and one ear open to what they were saying. And I'm listening to that stuff and I'm thinking, holy F again, I'm thinking, because I like to swear and I don't want to say it here in court, but that's basically what the thought that came through my mind about what was going on in those places. And then while those kids were there in those residential schools, they weren't at home learning from their grandparents. That whole multiple generations of knowledge that was typically passed on by those grandparents was lost. Where were those canoe routes? Where were those portages? Where was a good place to hunt sturgeon? Where was the good place to hunt caribou? All that knowledge was lost and those kids couldn't function in the bush anymore. They got home from residential school with traumatic experiences going through their mind, and they had a hard time finding uh, job in the workplace as a result, and they couldn't go in the bush anymore. They didn't know how, because they had lost all that opportunity to learn, because some of them spent their whole entire childhood in those places, being traumatized by the people who ran those places. Uh, uh, Also, I guess when you're looking at the multiple generations, that by the time the second or third generation came down, all that knowledge was lost about the land and about what was there. And those grandparents now didn't have that knowledge to pass on. So-
What was the tradition with families and the land before residential schools?
Typically the whole family would go out in the bush, and that's what would happen. Everybody in that family unit had a role to play. And for the kids, and my dad tells me about this, when they were young, they were made little bows and arrows, and they blunt head arrows, not sharp pointed arrows, so they hit each other in the eye with it. But blunt arrows, and they'd hunt partridge and rabbits, and they'd set snares and hunt birds, because they ate birds as well. So that was their job. And a lot of times the grandparents, our grandmother's job was to skin and clean animals. The mother looking after the kids and doing a lot of things that were needed done around the camp. But the women themselves also had hunting skills. A lot of those women were as good hunters and trappers as the men were. But they needed to look after their role in that camp, so that the guys could go out there and not have to worry about what was going on back at the main camp. So they had their role looking after that camp and running that camp, and the kids and the whole bit. So the guys could go out there and trap and then come home and bring their stuff back. And it was even like that. It was even like that when I used to go out with my wife Dorothy and her grandparents, old Willie Jagnash and Eliza Jagnash. And old Willie would go out, and I would go out, and we were gone all day, sometimes not coming home in a canoe until dark. But when we came home to that cabin was there, and there's a light in the window. That cabin was warm, there was food on the stove. We didn't have to worry about that, so we could stay out there as long as we want. And we were more productive because of that. And the grandmother, we take a day off every once in a while to catch up with skinning and stretching stuff like that. But that old lady, that the grandmother, was proficient at that, and she did most of that. So that was another task that we didn't have to worry about. So we didn't have to take that much time off. So we could get out in the bush again. But with the residential schools, a lot of that family unit was broken up. With the day schools, that family unit was broken up because the kids had to go to school. So the guys were not as efficient anymore. They'd go out in pairs basically on their own, and they have to do everything. Then they come back to camp, you got to do everything on your own. So you're not as efficient. So they break up that whole family unit. Yeah.
And how did that disruption that you've described impact on the ability to strive for or achieve Minno-Bawatsawa?
Well, the guys were not as efficient, basically, when they were out there. And again, that whole issue in regards to passing down knowledge was missing. It was cut basically. So and trying to reach a level of a better life, uh, their family unit was split. Your dad was gone. Your grandfather was gone. He was in the bush. In regards to the residential school, your brothers and sisters were gone. You know, as a parent, your daughter was gone. Your son was gone. That whole family unit was disrupted, and the trauma that was put on our people by that disruption. It's still felt today. Still recovering from that today. That multi-generally and generational trauma from, and particularly the residential schools, making people less efficient, making people not able to hold jobs. My wife talked to me one time about that whole issue in regards to marriages and relationships. And she told me, of all my friends, she told me, you and I are the only ones that are still together. And she said, that's because of you, because you didn't go to residential school. So that breakup of that whole family unit, and how can you reach a good life when your family is all broken and traumatized?
Chief Mashano, the last area I'm going to ask you about is relative wealth disparities between Indigenous and not Indigenous populations
Yep.
in the territory of Big Dugong Nishnawbe.
Yeah, now speak particularly to Big Dugong, because that's what I know best. Again, when I was growing up, we didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. Well, electricity came in, like I said, sometime in the late 50s, early 60s. We didn't have running water. I think they put wells in sometimes in the late 60s, but we still had to haul the water. We had hand pumps, and running water didn't start to go in until the early 70s. I remember them digging up the lines. When Dorothy and I first moved into our own house in 1970, there was no running water. I used to have to haul that water by pail myself. I was working at the mill in Marathon because I started there sometime 66, I don't know, and I quit to go and work for Pakistan National Park. But I remember when we had our new house in 1970, and it was laundry day. When I'm on day shift, I'd have to go down to the river and go and make 22, 23 trips with 2 pails of water, so she'd have enough water in all her tubs and containers to wash clothes in. And I did that before I went to work.
And how did your standard of living at Big Dugong Nishnawbe compare to the standard of living in the communities that you've described that were developed in the 1940s for the sole purpose of extracting resources? How did your standard of living compare to the populations living in Heron Bay South and Terrace Bay at that time?
We'll move to Terrace Bay first, and then we'll move closer to home. In Terrace Bay, like I said, I worked there 63, 64, 65, somewhere around there. We used to stay in a bunkhouse. And then we'd eat in the cafeteria. That bunkhouse was fully equipped, running water, the whole bit. We didn't have to worry about anything. So we could take showers and everything. When we were working there, we were on the service gang. I worked in the service gang. I worked on the pond, pushing wood up the jack ladder, and I worked out on that road going into Lake A. At one point, we cut that road in. But when we were on the service gang, we used to go into town because it was Kimberly Clark was a community, and Terrace Bay was a community-run town. We basically fixed fences, cut grass, changed shingles, stuff like that around town in the communities. Went and cut grass on the golf course down there, and they had
was a
an
golf
arena.
course?
They had an arena as well, but we never. At least I didn't go and work in the arena. But all the services and facilities of a town. I'd go home now and there was nothing. There was no electricity yet. Oh, sorry, but there was electricity, but there was no water, no running water yet because electricity came in somewhere around the late 50s and 60s. So we did have electricity, but there was no water. We'd have to go to the toilet out in the outhouse, out back. And this was again, and this was again in the mid 60s. So that big difference of the municipalities and then coming home onto the reserve. The town of Marathon. I remember old Charlie Taunts had an old truck, and he was married to my Aunt Rosa. And he was one of the very, very few vehicles that were on our reserve. And she used to take us to the matinee movie in Marathon on Saturday afternoons. And I remember behind them, behind the theater, there was a rec hall, and there was a nice outdoor pool there with nice blue-green water. And I could see the kids swimming there. And I used to wish I could go there and swim in that pool because I had to swim in the muddy old Pick River. But again, an arena there, a curling rink, the whole bit running water. You come back home, you don't have that. Closer to home now, in Heron Bay, and the Ontario Paper town site, which was just 2 kilometers north of our boundary. From my home, I could walk to that town site in 20 minutes. And again, it sprung up just like out of nowhere in the mid 40s. Running water, electricity, sewers, with open sewer running into the Pick River, and some of our people taking water from the Pick River. So we'd work there, and I remember myself and my chum Cecil Taunts and my chum Arnold Machano walking up on the weekend. We wanted to get cleaned up so we can go out and chase girls, like any young man. And we didn't have showers at home to do that. We'd walk all the way up to the town site. We'd take a shower in the bunkhouse because they let us use the bunkhouse if you were working there. They'd give you a little medallion, brass medallion with a number on it. And that was your company number. So you could use their facilities. You could eat in a cookery. You could use the facilities in the bunkhouse. So those differences in our standard of living. And I want to mention one thing because again, this is something that burns me. When the Ontario Paper Company was closing down, they started to close down sometimes in the mid 60s. And by 1970, early 70s, I think they were gone altogether. But we came across a letter when we were doing our land claim research. We came across a letter that the Ontario Paper Company sent to Jean Chrétien, who was the Minister for Department of Indian Affairs at the time. Ontario Paper offered to sell that entire town site to the Department of Indian Affairs so that we could use it for $1 because it would save them from tearing it down. And we see the letter from John Chrétien basically saying no. So there's this entirely functional community that the Ontario paper wanted to give to us. And John Chrétien says no.
What happened to that community?
It got tore down. There's nothing there now. Ontario paper had to tear it down. It's gone now. There's a few concrete foundations there, but other than that, there's nothing.
And in terms of the services available to people in the Heron Bay community or at Terrace Bay,
Yep, and again, back then, we didn't have a clinic. There was no such thing as a clinic. We didn't even get a community hall really until I believe it was early 70s. But in Heron Bay South, where the Ontario paper town site was, there was a clinic, fully functional clinic, and a doctor there. But to be fair, that doctor did make house calls to Beekton. He would come down there personally. There was a hospital in Marathon. Again, as I mentioned before, for emergencies, people would go there. It wasn't until later on that we had full access, and I can't remember the date. I wouldn't be able to do that. But in the early days, I remember we never used to use that unless it was an absolute emergency. When my brother-in-law Herbie fell off the train and sliced his arm off, that's where they did his surgery in that hospital. But for all intents and purposes, we didn't have access to that hospital. And like I said, the women used to go to Thunder Bay to have their babies. Why, I don't know. So there was those discrepancies really and differences in how our people were treated in regards to even simple medical services.
even today, Chief Mashano, and despite your efforts, how does the standard of living at Big Dugong Nishnabeg compare to the standard of living in Terrace Bay or Marathon?
I would say it's less than what we're getting there, despite all underfunding from the federal government. But we don't have an arena. We have a clinic, but we don't have a hospital. We'd like to do that. And again, I talked about that whole issue in regards to medical services, mental health services, and social services that need to be integrated. I mean, they need to be working as one, and that's something that we aspire to do, rather than having those services work in silos. But typically, our guys don't have an arena, so they don't have access to sports. We're working on that. So the standard of living is still less. But again, you look at the whole education system, our people, our schools get funded less than the school boards. And why is that? Why is a municipal or a non-Indigenous school board worth more than a First Nation school?
Now you say you're getting there, Chief Mashano. My last question to you is, to get there, what do you need?
We need additional resources. That's what we need. To do all this stuff doesn't come out of thin air. You need resources to do everything, and every municipality knows that. And how do you get those resources when you're always left out? We don't have the ability to tax corporations. That's why we're always looking for own source revenues and making deals with corporate entities to try to get some additional revenue to bring us up to par. And it's a constant struggle to do that. Why is it a struggle like that?
Miigwech, Chief Mashano, those are my questions.
My gosh. Thanks for taking it easy on me.
I have no questions for Chief Machado.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chief Machado. My name is David Rankin, and I represent Ontario in this matter. So first, I want to thank you for your evidence, Chief Machado, and in particular for your breakdown of the phrase Minnow Bemadzewin, which has been marked as Exhibit 24. And I have a couple of follow-up questions about that. Do you have a copy of that with you at the desk?
Yep.
So Chief Machado, I see that you're breaking down the phrase into, I believe you called it Lego pieces, which is quite helpful. And the question that I have for you relates to this. I've sometimes heard Minnow Bemadzewin related to the word happiness. And I wonder if you could help us to understand, in your view, whether there's any relationship between Minnow Bemadzewin and happiness.
Well, I think that if you're living a good life, you got a roof over your head, you got a warm house, you got enough resources to feed yourself, you got enough resources to feed your wife, you got enough resources to feed your kids, you got enough resources to buy rubbers for your kids in the spring when it's wet. And you got enough resources to buy winter clothes for them when it's cold. That gives you a feeling, a good feeling. And how do you get there? How do you get there? How do you get there when you're constantly being suppressed all the time? So trying to make a connection on happiness, I guess, relates to that, that concept that you can look after your family. And that at some point in time, you can build up enough resources, enough material wealth that you can pass that on to the next generation so that they can pass that on to the next generation. And you build up each generation successfully. And I think that's what every parent, and I've said this before, every parent on this planet strives to do. And that makes you feel good, and that gives you some level of happiness.
Thank you, Chief Machado. My other question relates to the verb form of the word, and I believe that's the second box down, where you have Bemadazi, he or she lives, and then Minnow good, and then Minnow Bemadazi. And I understand that to be the verb form. Is that right?
That's a verb, yep. Minu Bemadze, sure, he lives a good life. And basically that's related to, again, I'm going to read right from here, that whole philosophical, culturally, physical way you live your life. If you're a good person, you're not a drug addict, you're not an alcoholic, you don't beat your wife, you don't beat your kids, you feed your kids, you buy them clothes, you're a good person. And I think that's, and you're compassionate and you care. And I think that's what's meant by Mino Bemadizine. Bemadize. She or he lives a good life, basically.
Thank you, Chief Machado. So right underneath of Minnow Bemadizi, at the very end of that sentence, it says being a good person. And would it be your evidence that you're just, the description you just gave is what you meant by being a good person on the document?
Well, if you're living, if you're living that good life where you're not beating your wife, you're not beating your kids, you feed them, you're a good person. And then that's what's meant by that. If you're constantly beating up your wife, what are you? You're constantly beating up your kids, what are you? And why are you doing that? Is it because you can't afford to do that and you've got to take that anger out on somebody else? I don't know. There's lots of different causes why people do those different things.
Thank you, Chief Machado. That's helpful. I just have a handful of other questions, and they relate to what was marked as Exhibit 25, the map called Bitagong Nishnabek First Nation Alienations. Do you have that with you?
Yeah. Well, the boundary map.
It does have the boundary, and it's called at the top left-hand corner, Bitagong Nishnabek First Nation Alienations.
It's the one by the
Oh,
GIS
yes,
guy.
okay, yep, okay, I got it.
Now, Chief Machado, do you see on the left-hand column under the legend, there's a tiny word that says confidential? Do you see that?
On the legend with the colors,
Just under the legend on the color.
or just under the legend on the
Yes.
colors?
I don't see any.
It's very
Oh, I
small.
see, but yeah,
Oh.
yep. My
Yes.
glasses are not,
Yes.
Yeah, feel free to read it out.
Yes.
It's hard to see.
Of all the days to forget my glasses, Your Honor. So it says confidential, not for circulation. Areas mapped are for discussion purposes only. Without prejudice to Aboriginal rights and title, including title case and negotiations with the Crown, areas mapped are not representative of all priority areas. Do you see that?
yep,
Chief
I
Machado?
see it.
And I take it that would be something that Mr. David Caruthers would have written on the map. Is that right?
I would suspect that David Carruthers would have put that there. And the reasoning for putting that there is because we use this map when we're trying to educate a lot of those mining companies in particular, but forest companies as well, about the land claim and indigenous rights. We talk to them about cumulative impacts, and we have them sign an NDA in regards to that, and that's why that is there.
Elder Machado, where Mr. Caruthers indicates that the map is for discussion purposes only, do you know what he meant by that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Miigwech, those are all my questions.
Yep.
Chief Machado, Cameron Fisk for Canada. I don't have any questions. That doesn't mean I wasn't listening attentively. I very much appreciated meeting you yesterday and hearing from you today. Thank you very much, Miigwech.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Mhm.
Chief Miigwech. Thank you for appearing and spending the time you did
Mhm.
with us, not just on the stand, but as Mr. Fisk just said, in our time yesterday and today together.
Okay.
We all appreciate it.
Great.
Okay. Do we have?
We have Elder Goodchild as our next witness. We could start him,
Mhm.
which is what I suggest. And if it's all right with the court, sit till about 4:30.
Sounds very good.
Thank you.
Perhaps you can just let me know what is the balance of your plan for the week. We have Elder Goodchild and then,
Then we have Counselor Solomon tomorrow.
Yeah, so Elder Goodchild, I expect his testimony to run over till tomorrow.
yes,
And then Chief Tangi, the chief of Michipicoten, and Counselor Solomon of Fort William First Nation. So, and then on Thursday, Chief King of Gull Bay.
Okay.
So if the three scheduled for tomorrow, one spills over till Thursday, we've got time. We shouldn't be tight for time.
okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Elder Goodchild, please. And Elder Goodchild would like to hold the eagle feather while testifying. And I'd ask that the oath or affirmation be administered, please.
State and spell your name for the record.
Raymond Goodchild, RaymondGoldchild.
You solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you to the court touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I will.
You can affirm. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. As we've just heard, sir, your name is Raymond Goodchild. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, do you have an Anishinaabe name?
Yes, I do. Tybishko McCaw.
And I'm going to help the court reporter with that, and perhaps you'll let me know if I spelled this correctly. I have TYBISHKOMAKWA. Tybishkamakwa.
Correct.
What does that mean, sir?
Follow the path of the bear.
Follow the path of the bear. Are you a member of a First Nation?
Yes,
Which one?
Paul Goshing, Place Flat First Nation.
And you're going to have to help us with Pagashing.
Well, we could go with Place Flat First Nation.
Okay. And we might help the court reporter at 4:30 with the spelling of Pagashing. And Pace Plat is PAYSPLAT. Is that correct?
Yes,
And where do you live now? And we don't need the precise street address, but where do you live, sir?
Pace Flat.
And for those who may be less familiar with the area, can you tell us roughly where Pace Plat is?
2 hours and a half northeast of Thunder Bay, 45 minutes north of Nepegan, 20 minutes from Scriber, west.
20 minutes west of Scriber?
Yes, sir.
Do you identify with any clans or dodems?
Yes. From my mother, Bear, from my father, Moose.
And now for the indelicate question, how old are you, sir?
This November, I'll be 67.
Now, I understand that you are an elder with Pace Plat First Nation. Is that correct?
Yes,
You are recognized as such by Pace Plat?
yes.
When were you recognized as an elder?
I started in the 50s. I really started in the 80s, 88, all the ceremonies. I attended Sundance, Sweat Lodge, powwow ceremonies. Go see my elders. They taught me the history about since 1600s. They talked about the 1700s. They talked about how we had a fishing industry with the Hudson Bay Company. We had Hudson Bay Pulses, where the Hudson Bay Company started fishing.
And I'm going to ask you to pause there because you said you started in the 50s. You're referring to your 50s. Is that correct?
Yes,
And you were recognized as an elder then, if you're now, you've told me 66 years old. You became an elder approximately when, sir? What year?
50, when I got community, they got these program guidelines and policies where they say, oh, you're elder now, you deserve some recognitions and you know some ceremonies and you say the prayers for the feasts and stuff.
So if you were about 50 then, you're 66 now, 16 years ago, it's 2023, so roughly in or about 2007.
Correct.
Now, you've told us some of what your role as an elder in the community involves. Can you elaborate on that for us? What does your role as an elder entail?
Initiating ceremonies, teaching young people how to live a Minnebazoan life, how to learn the history of our community, learn about different ceremonies and work on yourself, and also teach the young people what the good life in sweat lodges, cultural camps, powwows, and sun dances, and also teach them about the 7 grandfather teachings.
So there's an element of learning that you told us about and an element of teaching. Is that correct?
Yes,
You mentioned the 7 grandfather laws. Can you tell us about those?
yes, the best I can. The 7 grandfather laws are honesty, truth, love, wisdom, humility, respect, courage. If you want me to go in more detail, I will.
All right. Well, perhaps I will ask you, if you were teaching someone in your role as an elder about the 7 grandfather laws, what is their importance to Anishinaabe culture and its belief system?
The 7 grandfather teachings is about Minnebazoan. When you do a pipe ceremony, the stem represents honesty because it's straight, right? When you speak, you be honest. When you talk the truth, you'll be truthful, right? You have ceremonies in the sweat lodges that have grandfather rocks that have 7 sacred laws. And when you come into there, you talk about the honesty, the truth, the love, the wisdom, the respect, the courage, and the humility in those ceremonies. When you go to those ceremonies, you learn about all that and you learn how to cleanse your spirit. Everything involves the spirit cleansing and how everything is done in a balance because there's a spirit, right? You may start at the powwows and you continue. You go to different ceremonies learning about the 7 teachings. There's never one set way of learning the ceremonies and learning about the 7 grandfather teachings. We have a big billboard, Nishnawbe Law, 7 teachings on the east side and on the west side. We have them up there, right?
Where's that billboard?
Right on Highway 17,
Near?
Pace Flat. No, so people see it and they'll may wonder, what's the 7 teachings? Then they find out, you know? And then we have culture camps where we have people and elders come and talk about the 7 teachings, right? And how they are, right?
I know that the 7 teachings are important to you as an elder. Are they important to Anishinaabe people?
Absolutely.
In your testifying, Elder Goodchild, holding an eagle feather, what does that mean to you?
Balance, honesty, the 7 teachings I gotta respect when I do this.
You brought some items with you to the witness stand and you produced one of them a short time ago, a pipe stem.
Yes,
Can I refer to the things you brought as your bundle?
they're just part of my bundle. There's more to it. And out in the sacred fire where I went, they say you're allowed to do that. There's sacred items and sacred things you're allowed to do at certain things, right? You're allowed, go ahead. Thank you.
So although you're an elder, you sought guidance at the sacred fire.
Yes, because it's Olam, heart. And every man and woman, we have heart and we have fire that keeps us alive, right? Energy that keeps us going.
Can you describe what I'll call a pendant that you have around your neck? What is that?
This is my faith rock, my medicine rock, right? In there is sacred medicines, right? In there is sage, sweetgrass, cedar, sima.
You've touched on this already, but how did you acquire the knowledge that you strive to pass on to others?
From other elders from my community, going to the ceremonies, taking part in all many different ceremonies since 1988. I even went on top of Mickey to fast for 4 days, to go into a sweat lodge, fast without drinking water. And you have certain directions and certain areas where there's the 7 teachings in there. And you learn all that. You start from the very, as a faster, when a young man turns 13, start losing his voice, he goes out on a vision quest and start learning what the 7 teachings are, right?
What did you do with what you were told by those who taught you? What did you do with it when you heard it?
When I heard it, I said, wow, this is pretty neat. This helps me to change. I understand. Now I have to practice it and work it, you know, and put it inside me and remember it and be ingrained in me.
How did you ingrain it in yourself? How can you remember it?
By working on the different kind of issues and traumas and cleansing your heart, and by saying, this is going to be a new spirit of me at this time. And by remembering what has been done at the ceremonies and continue going to the ceremonies. Because the more you go to the ceremonies of different types, you learn different things and you respect different things and you learn the truth about the ceremonies.
How is it that you remember it?
It becomes ingrained and becomes part of you. You become who you are, what you are.
Elder Goodchild, I'd like to discuss your childhood with you. Where were you born?
I was born in a town called Rossford.
Where did you grow up?
In a town called Rossford and Place Flat.
And Where is Rossport in relation to Pace Plat?
I would say it's about 10 kilometers west, northwest.
Now, do you know why your family was in Rossport?
At my time, my dad wanted to try to find a job, try to support his family, try to get established in his life, because at the reserve, there was no work. There was no source of income at that time.
What level of education did your father have?
He had grade 1. Couldn't even write his name. I had to read to him when I was grade 8.
Where had he gone to school?
He'd gone to school, St. Joe's boarding school.
You say boarding school?
Yeah, residential school, I guess it was, whatever, yeah,
Where was that?
in Thunder Bay.
Now, you say your father, well, your family was in Rossport because your father wanted to find work. Is that right?
Yes,
What kind of work did he find when the family moved to Rossport?
he was a laborer, seasonal labor. They would hire him on maybe for 4 months, 6 months to either work in the sawmill there or work in the fishing industry on the tugboats there in Rossport in the 50s, in the late 50s.
Was there any work on what I'm going to call the reserve, Pace Plat?
No, there wasn't even hydro there. There wasn't even plumbing there. There wasn't even electricity there. We had coal oil lamps, you know.
Did your mother work outside the home?
No, she stayed in the house with us. She tried to raise her 7 kids.
And that was my next question, whether you had any siblings, and I think we've got the answer.
Yes,
How many boys and how many girls?
4 boys and 3 girls.
Where did you fit into that?
I'm the oldest.
Can you tell the court about your family's living conditions in Rossport?
We were poverty. We lived in a tar paper shack, wooden log, sawdust house. Sometimes we would have to use cardboard to put up for windows.
We're going to slow down a little
Yep.
bit. How many rooms did the tar paper shack have?
Oh, it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
And you say it was a tar paper shack.
Yeah.
What was it made out of?
It was made of logs, 2x4s, sawdust, and those old tar, red tar blocks, right? And they had little windows and little when the windows break, we would have to put plastic or cardboard up.
What was the point of having sawdust?
Sawdust was insulation, I guess they thought.
How good a job did the sawdust do of acting as insulation?
You sleep on the floor with the blankets, right? Or coats. Some people are lucky in my family had blankets. Some people had coats. In the winter time, you would breathe. See the frost coming
From your
while you-
breath?
from your mouth. Yeah.
How was the home heated?
The home was heated with a small little wooden stove. That's how it was heated.
Did it have any plumbing?
No plumbing. We had to use the outside toilet. We had no indoor plumbing, no water. We would have to haul water in the winter time. We would have to go outside in outhouse, knock down number 2 stuff down, right? To use it sometimes because it froze. Then you would have to use a slop pail in the kitchen area during the night if you wanna piss or do a number 2, right?
And what did you do about bathing?
We would bathe in the summertime. We would be lucky to go to a creek. We bathe, we go swimming in there, or we would go down to a beach and we would go swimming there, or we would go down to the government dock and go swimming there. Or sometimes we would use, when we haul water, we would try to rub water and a little bit of soap on us, you know.
What about in the winter?
Wintertime, that's what we try, you know, wash ourselves. Maybe we wash ourselves once a month.
You described the government dock. Is that the government dock in Rossport?
Yes, it is, sir.
You described sleeping. Did you say on the floor?
Yes, sir. We slept on the floor. We slept on the floor with old jackets, and some of us, maybe my parents had blankets, you know.
Can you tell us about the food you ate as a child living in that tar paper shack?
Our refrigerator was a coal cellar, right? We had, mainly things we had was macaroni and potatoes. We would try to hunt, get moose and eat little fish, you know, small little fish to keep us going, you know. That's kind of food we would have. We would be, one day we served, we would be racing like seagulls going to the table because we were so hungry. Sometimes we won't go, we would eat maybe 2 times a day. 2 times a day, maybe we would go for 2 days, you know.
How often did you experience hunger?
You feel the pain, you feel the growing going, you know. You would feel it a long while, sometimes quite a bit, you know.
But my question was, how often would you feel that?
Oh, well, often I would say maybe a day or 2, you know, because you would bring out the macaroni and bring out the fried potatoes and you would eat that, you know. The
Were there
best part-
times when
Oh,
you would go shopping?
yeah,
For food?
our shopping would be when we were little kids. We would walk to Place Flat. We'd find those highway picnic tables, right? And we'd go look in the garbage can and we would find food in there. And as kids, we would eat either ice cream or that might be left, or apple pie, or a bag of chips that none of Jesus people left there. And we say, wow, you know,
Was that an unusual or a common experience for
at
you?
that time was a common experience for us to live.
And that is a common experience to stop at the garbage cans along the highway
Yes,
and look for food.
yes.
And how far in distance, how far was this Rossport from Pace Plat?
10 kilometers. Takes an hour and a half to walk. Then we would stop at the dump and go in there and shop for nails. You find nails, boards, you know, bolts, you know, even toys.
Where was the dump?
The dump was outside Place for about an hour. Maybe no, about a mile, I mean. That's what I mean, yeah. That was a Lands of Horse dump at that time.
Is there hydroelectricity at Pace Plat now?
Now,
Yes.
but if you try to put an industry, you don't have 3 megawatts there because they didn't hook the wires there, the hydro.
When did hydroelectricity come to Pace Plat?
I would say the late 70s. About 78, 79.
And when you lived in Rossport, what language did you speak at home?
Well, my dad tried to teach me Indian, but I had to learn English, you know, and I'm still trying to learn my language today. Very little I know.
What is your language?
My main language right now, I would say, is English,
Right.
you know.
And the traditional language of your people is what?
the Snowbeam win.
And when you lived in Rossport as a child, what was the population of Rossport?
I would say about 200 in the late 60s and late 50s. And, after the mine died and after the fishing industry got depleted, the town started to dwindle. People started moving out, the non-Indigenous people, right?
Of those 200 people, how many people or how many families were Indigenous, were Anishinaabe?
1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 people, 5 families.
And let's talk about your education with the time left to us today. And when you lived in Rossport, where did you go to school?
Non-Indigenous school, Rosswart Public School, right?
Can you
Grade
describe the
7.
schoolhouse to us?
It's a one-room school, no bigger than maybe by that television, and it had non-Indigenous kids there and bricks there and all bunch of non-Indigenous kids. We were maybe a few people there from the res. We weren't very big, It was
So-
just a government town school. They had a trustee school there. They had a trust board. They had teachers there, one room, teacher room.
What grades did you attend at that school?
From 1 to 7,
How did you get to school?
walked from my house to Rossford.
So you've said you grew up in Rossport. You just said you walked to Rossport.
Yeah, I walked from,
What's, were
I
you,
mean, I walked from the school, from Rossford, my house, to the school.
I see.
Yeah.
And that would take how long, do you recall?
Maybe only 20 minutes.
And you told us about the makeup of the population of Rossport.
Yeah,
Then, as you were in school, what was the makeup of your school population in that one-room school?
majority of them was non-Indigenous, We were probably say 10 to 90% were non-Indigenous.
So 10% indigenous, 90% non-indigenous?
Yeah, I guess so. 90% non-Indigenous, 10% Indigenous.
And as a child, did you notice any differences between the indigenous students and, let's say, yourself and the
Yeah, they had
non-indigenous?
nice shoes, nice clothes, nice shirts, nice jackets. They had nice lunch. I liked their lunches. I looked at their lunches. I liked them.
And what did you have by
I
comparison?
had bannock, maybe stale bologna sandwiches, I would keep, or maybe ketchup sandwich or peanut butter jams I would keep,
And your own clothing?
My own clothing with hole in the shoes, dirty ripped jeans, maybe ripped pants, ripped shirts, dirty shirts, ripped holes in them, missing buttons.
Did anyone give you food when you went to school at Rossport?
Yes, at some non-Indigenous family had compassion. They said, come for breakfast, come for lunch, come for supper. And I did. And that's probably how I survived in Rossport, I think, when I went there. They said, some other people fed me.
When did you see your first refrigerator?
In Rossport, when I saw it, I said, I'm in heaven. Holy catfish, look at all the food, bread, meat, butter, I was surprised, I couldn't believe it.
Now, you told us about the people who treated you with compassion
Yeah.
and showed you their refrigerator, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
Were there any people who were less compassionate?
Yes, there would people call me savage, wagon burner, tease me, talk about me, laugh at me, say I stink, you know?
Why did they say that you smelled?
Because I probably didn't have indoor plumbing to clean myself properly, you know? And sometimes in winter time or in the fall time, you know?
You described your clothes.
Yes, my clothes were holy. They were hand-me-downs. Maybe I wear clothes for a month or two before I get some even other clothes, you know?
And was there any means of cleaning your clothes in
Well,
the
we would-
shack?
Yeah, we would haul water. We would try to haul water and we used the scrub boards, you know, those scrub boards, and we would try to do that, you know?
And I note the time, Your Honor, it's 4:30, and I wonder if this might be a convenient time to break for the day.
Yes, please. Okay, and can you remind me about tomorrow?
Previously proposed a 9 o'clock coffee time in order for the court and council to meet as the only remaining witness that council and the court haven't met is Chief Kanji, but Chief King. But I'm mindful that some prefer a later start if possible, or an ordinary time start. So if council and the court, if it's acceptable, we could have a meet and greet at 10 o'clock in open court at 10:30.
That suited everyone? I think that makes great sense.
That's
One
fine.
feather up.
That's fine with me.
Oh, feathers up.
I see that.
I checked out of my room. I thought it would be finished today.
Oh,
Someone's gonna
We'll
take
make
care of that
arrangements.
for you.
Mr. Over.
yes, we will make arrangements.
Oh, we checked out our travel costs, my driver and me.
All right. Arrangements will be made. Elder Good